Welcome, everybody, to Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting-edge conversation while exploring the quantum possibilities. And we're doing it again tonight, and we're going to do it in about one of our favorite topics. Before we get started, I just want to always thank you. Thank you for being here. If you're here live, put hashtag live. If you're here on the replay, drop hashtag replay. Let us know where you're coming from. And I want to thank you for your super chats. Sometimes, we're so involved in the conversation that I don't get to say thank you. So thank you from last week. And thank you if I ever missed your super chat. We appreciate your generosity and for participating in the give and the receiving of abundance. Before we get started, I want to invite you to our Mastermind Connection. The Mastermind Connection is a weekly gathering of people that think way outside the box. Masterful manifestors. We get together and we come to an agreement on what benevolent purposes we are going to manifest for each week. Oftentimes, of course, it's for the world, it's for peace, it's for abundance for all, it's for safety for people that are in danger, freedom for the inventors that can't get their inventions out yet. And we do a beautiful guided imagery that is so relaxing and so lovely. We meet in the quantum realm. We think and we feel and we experience that which we want to see manifest. And I finally have a really great example. One of our participants lives in Canada, and in the beginning of our meeting, she said, can we please mastermind for this 2-year-old dog that had been lost in the freezing snow for 9 hours. This will give you a little idea of how we visualize. So together, right, we meet in the quantum realm, and then together, individually but unified, we bring each of our laser beams of light together. We sent it out to the sweet soul of the dog, wherever it was, so that the dog could follow it home. Now that's very nebulous, Nori. I mean, how do you know it was going in the right direction? How do you know the dog's going to follow it? Well, I knew because we used the language that the universe understands, right? It's not up to us how the universe makes it happen. It's up to us to desire it. It's up to us to see that dog on her way home or walking through the door or being rubbed down with a towel because she's home. And lo and behold, before we were done with the second hour, right? Actually, right after the first hour, we got the notification that the dog was home. She was out 9 hours and then she was home. So that was such an immediate manifestation. But that's an example of what we do on Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m. Eastern. At 3 p.m., we have a discussion or we show some videos and we discuss that. And it's just some of the most amazing people on the planet. Some of the most amazing people off the planet drop in too. So if you'd like to join us, send an email to the mastermindconnection@gmail.com. Augie will send you the link. You can come and join us, see how it feels, and maybe you'll just want to keep coming back. That has happened to many of us. So, Augie, please tell us about our very interesting guest.
Yes, for the next 55 minutes, we're going to have a lot of fun because we have Bart Sibrel with us. And for those of you that like to surf the internet while you're listening, his website is right there on the screen with you, but it's sibrel.com, SIBREL.com. And you will find some videos and some evidence. Isn't that kind of a novel idea, to have evidence about some of the things that we talk about? Bart is a very controversial guy because he is messing with the paradigm of the sleeping public. And, you know, a lot of people don't like that. And especially governments don't like that because they want the people to be sleeping, just like they've done for probably thousands of years, coming up for air once in a while and do some little work and then go back to sleep again. And who is better than Barb to do that? He is an award-winning filmmaker, a writer, investigative journalist. He's a producer of many shows, TV programs, and a bunch of other stuff that you're going to read about when you go to his website. And tonight, we're going to be very controversial. And the issue is, did we really go to the moon in that we were told about in 1969 and the next 3-4 years? There is some things that you're going to see here that's going to probably mess, even if you don't think we did, it's just going to mess with your head a little bit, because I think your evidence that you're hoping to find is going to be a little more solid. It's a very polarized issue, and a lot of people have opinions. And I have found that the concept of don't confuse me with the facts because my mind is made up, that concept is alive and well everywhere. And I like to remind you of something, even when you are kind of thinking both ways. I want to remind you of something that the head of the CIA under Ronald Reagan said at the tail end of an interview when he thought the microphone was off, but it went out. And he said, when we find that everything the American public believe is false, we know our disinformation program is working. Think on that. Think on that. And then look at the evidence we're going to be talking about tonight. So welcome to the show, Bart.
Well, hello there, Augie. How are you doing?
Fantastic, I think. And it's going to be better even yet after this show.
All right. Well, you know, I was thinking about something that Nori said while we were getting ready for the show, that this is kind of like the epitome of conspiracy theories. And if you really think about it, it is kind of absurd that they faked the moon landing and it was all done in a TV studio. It's really the epitome of a conspiracy theory. In fact, when the CEO of YouTube testified before Congress about 2 years ago, and they were encouraging censorship, encouraging taking down things by journalists like myself because they were too controversial and couldn't possibly be true. Her crowning example of such a thing was people who think the moon landing fraud was staged. And yet, what if that is in fact true? And if it is true that it was staged, then what YouTube is doing is removing the truth and putting up lies. And come lo and behold, it is a fact that they faked the moon landing. And at Sabrell.com, you'll see a book that I just published called Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker on the CIA hit list, which goes into great detail that my 2 documentaries about the moon landing fraud did not cover, including a deathbed confession from a gentleman by the name of Cyrus Eugene Akers, who was the chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. And he said on his deathbed that he personally eyewitnessed the faking of the moon landing as he stood beside President Johnson. And he gave us a list of 15 people that President Johnson gave him who were allowed in as VIP visitors to eyewitness the faking of the moon landing, filmed June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968, a year in advance. So we have this crazy idea that the moon missions were staged, and come to find out, it's true. And what's doubly ironic is that it's what mankind claims and science claims is the greatest accomplishment of all time. Now, how ironic is that? That mankind's greatest accomplishment is a complete lie perpetrated by the country that claims to be the beacon of truth and democracy in the world, is the biggest liar. And that's just the way that it is. And the problem is, whoever shot JFK, he's still dead. And whoever did 9/11, all those people are still dead. But this is a positive lie. This is giving candy to a child. And during the Vietnam protests, Nixon said the greatest threat to his country wasn't China or Russia. It was Americans protesting the federal government. That was the biggest threat. So this was a pep rally. And if you staged the event, then you could guarantee its success and give something for the American public to cheer about. And then trying to take that away, taking that candy away from a child, they fight and fight and fight and kick and scream. They don't want you to take it away. I've even talked to a professor of an aerospace university who said there's no evidence whatsoever, even though we have controversial proof that they did not go to the moon. He said, there's nothing that would make me recant the glorious moon landings. And I said, well, what if you saw Neil Armstrong on national TV tearfully confessing that it was fake, it was filmed at Cannon Air Force Base, and he's sorry. And the professor said he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway. And this guy's teaching university. So this is what you talked about, Augie, that people have to have an open mind. And the ancient texts say that pride comes before destruction. And what is pride? Well, pride in my mind is the unwillingness to be wrong, just as humility is the willingness to be wrong. And I remember going to a church once, and the pastor said, who likes to be wrong? And I was the only one willing to raise my hand. They had an answer for everything, but not necessarily the correct answer. That's why I didn't join that church. And I realized it's good to be wrong. Number one, you're not walking around in error. Number two, you're learning something new. So I was the biggest fan of the moon missions. I had a wall of 20 color prints of Apollo 11 on my wall that I saw every day, 10 years in a row. So I saw pictures of men on the moon, allegedly, 3,650 times. I was the biggest fan. How many of your viewers could say that? And yet, the idea of them being fake caught me as an open-minded 14-year-old. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because I saw this gentleman by the name of William Casey, who had high security clearance. He worked for Rocketdyne. He was on site at NASA for 6 years during the Apollo program. He said it was fake because he read confidential memos from von Braun to the Pentagon warning them that the odds of going to the moon on the first attempt with untried 1960s technology, which had 1/1,000th the computing power of a cell phone, the odds of them doing that the first time was a 1 in 10,000 chance. In fact, in the entire history of aviation, pick any flying machine, any spacecraft, anything, not a single one worked on the first attempt, except the most complicated one ever made. And then NASA has never kept a schedule, not a single time. The Hubble telescope, 10 years behind schedule. They said in 2014 and 2018, they're going to have people orbiting the moon. They were 100% behind schedule, and they could only have mannequins orbit the moon. The only time NASA kept a schedule is the most complicated one of all time. And then we found classified footage of fake photography. We have an eyewitness, and I can show later in a screen share that you can prove the moon landing fraud by one photograph of shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart when they should be parallel in sunlight. So you can scientifically prove the moon landings are fake with one picture. And then you have the logic that today, with 5 decades better technology, NASA can only send astronauts 250 miles into space. Now, the moon is 1,000 times farther. So what they're claiming is they had 1,000 times greater space traveling technology 50 years ago than they do today, which means technology was greater in the past than in the future. but that's an historic and scientific impossibility. So that proves it's fake. You see, if it weren't for people's emotional attachment to the glorious event, to the pride of mankind, pride of America, pride of science, they would accept the truth for what it is. I mean, if a college professor at an aerospace university says that a confession from an Apollo astronaut saying that it was fake would not convince him, that he would still think he knew better than the astronaut anyway, if that's not an emotional burn-in, I don't know what is. And that person should be in a mental hospital rather than teaching university, right? So I'll let you guys ask me a question or two, but that's my opening remarks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I am always curious about the person. How did you get into all this? How did this begin for you? That's a big can of worms you opened.
Yeah, well, the film that I made, which is what I'm known for, I've been a filmmaker for 35, I guess 40 years now, and I've made maybe 100 films, but my most famous, or dare I say infamous one, is called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. Now, you can see that for free at Sabrel, S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, REL, Sabrel.com. Click on the top left button, Moonman Video Links, and it's link number 2. My book, which just came out, is interactive. There's 16 video links. So I write a chapter and say, look, I'm about to talk about the production of the movie, the behind the scenes. So watch it first so you know what I'm talking about. Well, that movie was financed $1 million by a board member of an aerospace company who builds rockets for NASA, who knows that it's fake. And he thought it was his patriotic duty to expose this corrupt government lie. So oddly enough, my father was in the Air Force, and come to find out that the fake moon landing was filmed by the United States Air Force. And I remember interviewing Bill Casing for A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and then Fox, which was going to air it nationwide, wanted me to cut it down in half so that I could air in an hour, and I took the interview out. But he basically said on camera, and I had to actually look it up when I got this deathbed confession for the man who was there at the time. He said the whole thing was supervised by the United States Air Force, by General Sam Phillips. So my father was in the Air Force. So when they allegedly walked on the moon, I was just 4 years old. I was asleep in bed past my bedtime. However, he got an officer's VIP package of these pictures that I told you about. It was like a shrine in my wall. Imagine from the age of 4 to 14, seeing these every day, 3,650 times. Now, that's a lot of imprinting. That I'm 14 years old, and I see William Casing, the whistleblower at NASA, on the Oprah show or something like that, saying it was fake. Well, that caught me as an open-minded 14-year-old. So I'm like, oh, never thought about that. So I go back to the wall. I look at the pictures. Now, these are the original prints, which NASA has since color corrected, because originally the soil in these pictures was caramel brown, as it actually is on the moon. It only looks kind of bluish gray because of the washout of the sun. But the soil itself, as you can tell by the Chinese probes, which I think are real, is a caramel brown, and that's how they were. However, their original backdrops, which were rear projection, were a kind of a bluish gray. So you can tell pretty easily in a straight line, left to right horizontally, where the real soil ended and the fake backdrop began. And I'm like, oh, that's a fake backdrop. And so it kind of planted a seed in my mind. Well, fast forward 10 years, I'm 24 at this point in the story. And of course, all of this, I go into great detail at my book at Sabrel.com, which is audio. I read it, Kindle and print.
Great.
And then I'm 24 years old. I'm a filmmaker, right? Now, my job as a filmmaker is to make fake things look real. That's how I can tell that these pictures were filmed with electrical lighting. Well, lo and behold, I'm editing one day for the man who produced the TV show I saw 10 years earlier about Bill Casing saying we didn't go to the moon. And I'm like, who was that guy? And he's like, I don't remember. Call the San Francisco office. I called them, and they said, had I called just 2 or 3 days later, they would have not been able to tell me his name, because they throw away everything every 10 years to make room for more archives. So I call it Bill Casing. He says, hey, you're a filmmaker. You should make a documentary about the fake moon landing. So I took off about 6 months, paid myself a salary for 6 months out of my savings, and found out that the Soviets were much more advanced. After all, they launched the first satellite, the first animal, the first man, the first woman, the first spacewalk, the first crew of 3, the first of 2 spacecrafts at the same time. For every 10 hours the U.S. spent in space, they spent 50 hours, 5 times the experience. And they never, even 50 years later, ever put a man on the moon because it can't be done yet. In fact, one of the clips you can see for free at Sabrel.com is a current NASA engineer saying the technology necessary for an astronaut to survive lethal radiation on a trip to the moon and back has yet to be invented. That's why they're mannequins orbiting the moon instead of people. How about that?
Wow.
We can play golf and drive buggies on the moon 50 years ago, but today we can only send mannequins to only orbit and not land. Well, in any case, I start finding out the shadows intersect, and 2 of the 3 astronauts won't give interviews, and the administrator of NASA resigned without explanation days before the first Apollo mission. Didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I'm like, oh, this is odd. And I'm thinking, I think there's at least a 1 out of 4 chance that they faked it, and a 1 out of 4 chance that the greatest event in human history, from a secular point of view, is staged. That's a pretty scary possibility. So I actually turned down the project because I like puzzles. I used to draw mazes as a kid, and I also have, if you've seen the follow-up film, Astronauts Gone Wild, the kind of relentless, never give up personality. Knowing that about myself, I realized that if anyone could get to the bottom of it, it might be me. And if they did not go, and I start overturning these rocks, I could be risking my life. So I turned down the project, and I said, I'm not going to risk my life for what Nixon did. So about 5 years go by, I start reading the ancient texts about right and wrong in a spiritual battle between good and evil. And I realized that if they faked the moon landing and murdered people to cover it up and embezzled an equivalent of $200 billion and printed it on coins and stamps when it was not true at all, if that's true, then that's actually more profound historically than if they had actually gone. So what we have is one of the greatest events in human history isn't the moon landing. One of the greatest events in human history is the faking of the moon landing, because the leaders of the United States of America were too immature that they set a goal that they could not achieve and decided to embezzle the money, murder people in order to cover it up. And that event is actually more significant than if they'd actually gone. And I realized I'm going to die anyway. And if they faked it, that's an important truth that mankind needs to know. So I changed my mind. 5 years after first turning it down, I called them back and I said, I'm going to do this. And as serendipity would have it, a few days later, I meet a millionaire who gives us $1 million to make these movies.
Wow.
And then 3.5 years into the 7-year project, I pop in a tape and it says at the beginning, do not show to the public. And it's NASA, and I can show this in a screen share. It's them pretending to be halfway to the moon with a 1-foot model of the Earth. Allegedly, they say they have the camera at the lens of the camera at the window of the spacecraft looking back at a tiny Earth with black. The lights come up. It's a 1-foot model of the Earth. And we even have a 3rd track of audio of the CIA prompting the astronauts not to speak until a fake 4-second radio delay goes by to give the impression that they're beyond Earth orbit, when in fact they were in Earth orbit all the time. Now, I showed this tape. Mind you, I've worked at NBC News for 2 years, and I showed this to the news director. He turned pale white, collapsed in his chair, and said, "Oh my God, this absolutely proves they never left Earth orbit, meaning the moon landings are fake." And I said, yeah, what do we do? He said, I cannot broadcast this. It will cause a civil war, and I will not go down in history as the man who caused the next American Civil War. Wow. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. You have proof that the government is so corrupt that they faked the moon landing, and you're afraid to show it because the corrupt government would be dismantled. Isn't that what's supposed to happen with corrupt governments? You see? And so it's a catch-22 that's biting us in the butt. 10 years go by. The new news director at NBC sees the very same footage, comes to the very same conclusion, and absolutely proves the moon missions are fake. You can see this footage for free at Sibrel.com. They hire me. They give me thousands of dollars, fly me to New York, put me up in a fancy hotel, interview me, describing the footage. They say we're going to do an exclusive nationwide broadcast on NBC News and show this footage that proves the moon landings are fake. Then, before it's aired, the United States government called them up, the producer told me so, and threatened them not to broadcast it. So they backed down and didn't broadcast it. The same thing happened with the BBC. They said, this proves we didn't go to the moon. We're going to broadcast it. They paid thousands of dollars, and they also got a call from the federal government, and they backed down.
Funny how that happens.
So, I know, and it's amazing. All the stuff is in. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon, and the number one reason.
Boy, he froze. But yeah, I have seen that video that he talks about when halfway to the moon, when they're trying to fit Earth into the window. I've seen the video, and the language that they're talking back and forth with explains very clearly that this is a fake.
Yeah, I don't think our guest knows that he's frozen.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, I can do a screen share and show it if you want.
Yeah, you were just frozen.
Screen share.
Yeah, you were frozen for a bit, so we didn't get to hear what was leading up to that. Are you with us?
He's still frozen?
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Do you see my screen?
There.
Yeah.
No, you were frozen.
Okay. Well, how about now?
Now you're good.
Okay, let me try share screen again.
Okay.
All righty. So here is the clip here. I'm going to turn the microphone toward my little speakers, and I'm going to turn up the volume. This is allegedly the Earth floating in space. You see that? And they claim that there's only one window that faces the Earth. All of this is on tape, and you can see it for free at Sibrel.com. And they claim that this is the Earth floating in space, that the lens of the camera is at the window, and that this is the blackness of space around it. When in fact, the camera's at the back of the spacecraft. This is a circular window that has a portion of the Earth outside it from Earth orbit. What you're about to hear now is Apollo 11 talk to NASA. And you hear NASA respond, and then 4 seconds are counted off, and then you hear a third track of audio, the CIA prompting the astronauts with talk only after 4 seconds go by to create a fake radio delay of being halfway to the moon. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004.
Okay, right to program.
So there's that talk right there.
11, Houston, don't the TV looks great, over.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, right to program.
So basically, that's them being prompted by the CIA, which we have on the tape. And then we have here the part that they did broadcast. In every NASA documentary about their alleged trip to the moon, they actually show this footage I'm about. He's 100 out. Remember, this is supposed to be the Earth floating in space, halfway to the moon, the blackness of space. The camera's really at the back of the spacecraft. They turned out the lights, all of which they talk about because they thought these conversations would be edited out. This is a circular window in Earth orbit. You're seeing part of the Earth out the window, and they've inserted a crescent piece of material to make in the window to make it look like the Terminator line between night and day. Here he is lying about being halfway to the moon.
All right, this is Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Okay, he just claimed that this was 130,000 miles out. Well, here's the exact same shot that he claimed was 130,000 miles out, right? This is supposed to be the Earth floating in space. Exact same footage. They hit stop on the recorder, but the button popped up. And remember, it said at the beginning, do not show this reel to the public. So they thought this wasn't even being recorded. You're about to see them remove part of the screen in front of the window. This is hands going in front of the window. See that? That's Michael Collins's arm. They're removing part of the crescent insert. See them? And that's a work light. And then you see the very same Earth. The lights come up, and you see that they are in Earth orbit with the bright Earth shine out the window, and the camera has been at the back of the spacecraft the entire time. We have this footage because we have the unedited. Mind you, it said right at the beginning, do not show this to the public. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're faking being halfway to the moon. Well, if they're faking being halfway to the moon, which they are clearly doing, two NBC news directors agreed that's them faking being halfway to the moon, plus a third track of audio that's not NASA, not the astronauts, telling them to say talk only after 4 seconds go by. Because if you answer right away, it'll prove that you're really close to the Earth with no radio delay. So they're faking a radio delay. Two separate news directors at NBC agreed it proved that the crew of Apollo 11 never left Earth orbit, and they're faking being halfway to the moon. They're faking being halfway to the moon because they cannot go halfway to the moon. And if they can't go halfway, then they can't go. And what a surprise, 50 years later, they still cannot go to the moon because mannequins are orbiting the moon now. And we have, as one of the clips at Sabrel.com, Kelly Smith saying the technology necessary to protect an astronaut from radiation and back has yet to be invented. So if they can't do it today, they certainly couldn't do it 50 years ago on the first attempt. So but if you want to see the shadows intersecting for half a minute, I'll be glad to show you that one. I mean, so we have the proof. We have, a deathbed confession, because in court an eyewitness, hey, I saw him shoot this person. That counts, right? We have the footage of them pretending to be halfway to the moon from Earth orbit. And we have the logic that you can't have 1,000 times greater space traveling technology 50 years ago than you do today. And then we have the simple photograph that I'm going to show you here that shows basically them. Let me make sure I got the right clip here. And let me remove this just a second. There it is. So right here, this is how shadows are supposed to look in sunlight. I took this picture myself. These are two telephone poles about 5 or 6 feet away. It's a bright, sunny day. You can go outside and see the same thing. The sun's 1,000,000 times bigger than the Earth in volume. It's going to cast shadows parallel. Now, the moon with no atmosphere is 20 times brighter than a desert on Earth. So you're not going to need flash photography or supplemental lighting. It's 20 times brighter than a desert at high noon. So here we show a picture that they claim is from the last mission to the moon, and you're about to see it on the right-hand side. Those are the shadows running parallel, as they always will in sunlight. You go outside on a sunny day, you can prove it. Here's pictures that they claim were taken on Apollo 17, where an astronaut shadow is going at 12 o'clock and a rock about 5 feet away is going at 9 o'clock. This is 90 degrees from what they claim is sunlight, when it's absolutely impossible for sunlight to have intersecting shadows from objects 5 feet apart at 90 degrees. This is proof that this was taken with electrical lighting, which means it's on Earth, not the moon. So all you need to prove the moon landing is fraud is this one picture that they claim is from the last mission to the moon. Shadows cannot intersect at 90 degrees in sunlight. I just showed you what they're supposed to do in sunlight. They're supposed to be parallel in sunlight. So if they're intersecting at 90 degrees, it means it's electrical light, which means they're on Earth, not the moon. So that proves it. So there we have 4 conclusive proofs that they did not go to the moon. They can't have greater technology in the past and the future. Deathbed confession, I was there, I witnessed it. The shadows intersecting at 90 degrees, and the classified footage of them faking being halfway to the moon. You could even add the fact that they destroyed all the technology out of NASA's own mouth. The technology to go to the moon, they intentionally destroyed, even though they didn't destroy the B-52 bomber, which is 70 years old, and there's 200 of them still in service in the Air Force. If you had a rocket that cost $200 billion to fly to the moon and back, and it did it 6 times and worked so great, why would you destroy it? Why would you destroy the schematic, the blueprints, the original videotapes, the original telemetry if you really went? Now, if you perpetrated a fraud, that's exactly what you would do. So the fact that they destroyed everything is actually proof of the fraud, because if they really went, they would never do that. So there's 5 proofs, you see? Mm-hmm. And what more do people need? I mean, they did not go. And it's not just the conspiracy theorists telling you that. It's a man who had pictures of the moon landing up on his wall for 10 years, who believed they were real, who had an objective mind. And even when someone who worked at NASA told me it was fake, I gave him the benefit of the doubt and still said, I'm going to believe they went until I have proof. Then I found the classified footage. And then right as I'm editing the book, Moon Man, which is at Sabrell.com, in audio that I read, Kindle or print, I get a deathbed confession from Cyrus Eugene Akers, who was there at Cannon Air Force Base, stood beside President Johnson, and gave us a list of 15 eyewitnesses. And one of these guys, Robert Ebeneger, wrote in his autobiography he was at Cannon Air Force Base in June of '68 for a classified reason. And it gets even worse than that. Okay, this is the new information I hinted at in my email to you. Basically, Cyrus Eugene Akers confessed something else, okay? And the first thing he confessed was not the moon landing fraud. He confessed he murdered somebody, okay? Now, when you're dying and fear you might meet God and not do so well on Judgment Day, and you know that confessing your sin is a big part of God forgiving you, right? He confessed he murdered a friend, a coworker, who also eyewitnessed the moon landing fraud, and was going to go to a reporter and tell the world because he thought it was morally wrong. He murdered somebody. That's what he really confessed. I did not put that in the book because his son was still alive. Now that he has died, I'm able to tell that. Mm-hmm. And then he said the reason why he killed this person was to cover up the moon landing fraud, because his friend was going to expose it. We don't know whether he was ordered to do it or did it as his own initiative as the chief of security for Cannon Air Force Base. And then my dad, like I said, was in the Air Force. I never heard of Cannon Air Force Base. I look it up, and every military branch has their intelligence division, and that's where it's headquartered, in Cannon Air Force Base. Yeah. He describes it in great detail. It's in my book. They had 2 large airplane hangars connected to one another. They tore down the wall between them. They spent weeks and weeks and weeks bringing in artificial lunar soil. And because there was so much construction on the base at the time, it kind of blended in. And this list of 15 people that President Johnson personally gave to him. One thing to consider historically is that President Johnson was the only president in modern times who is eligible to run for re-election and chose not to. The Democratic Party said, we're going to nominate you anyway. And he said, I will decline anyway, because he knew the faking of the moon landing would be in the next term. And who knew that would work? What if you got caught? Didn't want to have anything to do with it. And get this, Richard Nixon, President of the United States, with 1 billion people watching on television, the greatest accomplishment of mankind, does not show up for the launch. Shows up for the second one after they got away with the first one, but is too afraid to show up for the first launch and have a picture of him smiling and shaking Neil Armstrong's hand in case the truth of the fraud came out. He literally avoided being there for that reason, which you would never do if it were real. So the idea that it's Republican versus Democrat, that's a scam, right? Because our people we voted for, Congress and the Senate, right? That's the main body that we vote for. More votes are cast for them than president. Did the CIA ask Congress and the Senate to vote on faking the moon landing? No, they did not. They did it anyway. So voting has no difference whatsoever. And then if there's corrupt candidate A or corrupt candidate B to choose from, then it doesn't matter anyway. The Americans 90% wanted GMO labeling. They wanted to know if their ketchup contained GMO. I think Congress and Senate approved that because 90% of Americans were for that. And the president vetoed it. He says, I'm going to go with the corporations instead of 90%. So how can this be a democracy when 51% are supposed to have their way, when 90% don't have their way, right? When it doesn't matter because Democrat Johnson was there supervising the faking of the moon landing, and Tricky Dick Nixon, Republican, gave it the thumbs up. He could have said, no way, cancel the project. But did he do that? No, he did not. And he had the audacity to say putting a man on the moon was the greatest event since creation when he knew it was all a lie. Think about that.
You have covered a few of the reasons that is basically undisputable here, but I can think of 40 more. Or at least, let's say that they got into space. We are protected by the Van Allen belt. Outside of that, if they had that tin can outside of the Van Allen belt, it would be kind of putting a spoon in the microwave and turning the knob to the right.
Well, yeah, this is one of the clips at Sabrel.com. Kelly Smith tells the public that this whole point of the Artemis and Orion mission, which is basically the same thing, they just changed the name of it, that the whole point of the first probe they sent up in 2014, which went up to 3,600 miles, which is right in the middle of the radiation belt, and then came back with 2 Geiger counters on board and no people. Most people don't know every manned space mission, Gemini, Mercury, Skylab, the space shuttle, Soyuz, Skylab, all that was below this radiation field, which starts at 1,000 miles and is about 30,000 miles thick beyond that. The only time humans are said to have gone through it would be to the moon and back. So in 2014, the Orion project, which uses the same equipment as Artemis, sent up an unmanned probe with Geiger counters into the radiation field with 2 Geiger counters and came back. So what's the whole point of the mission? Well, it's at the point of the U-turn. Wherever is the point of the U-turn, that's the point. The point is the radiation field. The point is 2 Geiger counters. They need to know how much radiation is in there. We have a clip, which you can see for free at Sabrel.com, of Kelly Smith saying the radiation field is dangerous, meaning lethal to humans, and the technology necessary to survive a trip through it and back again from the Earth to the moon and back, that technology for astronauts to survive the radiation has yet to be invented. That's why they're mannequins orbiting the moon in Artemis. So if the technology to go through the belt to the moon and back has never been invented yet, then how did they go to the moon? So I call him up as a journalist. And I said, hey, let me talk to this guy. Well, he doesn't give interviews anymore since he put his foot in his mouth. I said, okay, seeing how this is a civilian project, why don't you give me those Geiger counter readings? And they said they cannot give me those Geiger counter readings because it's a classified secret. And I'm like, wait a minute. When you send a probe to the sun, is the temperature of the sun a classified secret? No, just nature. When you send a probe to Jupiter, how much helium is in Jupiter's atmosphere? That's not a military secret. That's just nature. So why would the amount of radiation in nature surrounding the Earth, why would that Geiger counter readings be a military secret? Well, it would prove that the moon landings are fake. So they wouldn't give it to me. And so, I mean, there's just so much proof they didn't go. And people are afraid to admit it.
I got another one I want to just run by you. And I'm a pilot, and I know what it takes for fuel to be able to go somewhere. Now, the fuel, let's say that by accident or by pure knowledge, they found a way to create a portable shield or a mesh around the craft so that they didn't have to worry about the radiation. Let's say they went to the moon, went around it, and went down. They burned fuel going down because they were slowing up. And then being on the surface, doing what they did, coming back up again, they didn't have more fuel left in that little can. They might have been able to make it possibly to about 10,000 feet. Because I know what it takes to run a jet engine. Rockets, they need more fuel than a jet engine does. There is no chance of them getting off the surface of the moon up back into orbit with the kind of fuel they had. It couldn't happen.
Well, that's
What's
true.
your
This is
comment
why
on
they.
that?
Yeah, that's true. This is why they. I don't know why I went out of focus there for a second. Let me try again. There we go. Well, yeah, this is why they destroyed the schematics. The lunar module in particular is, so far a fantasy, more than any of the hardware. That's why they destroyed the schematics, the blueprints, and the hardware of all this stuff. The alleged lunar modules at the Smithsonian, they're replicas. They're not the actual gear. They destroyed the actual gear. They destroyed the designs, the electronic schematics, and everything, because you can prove exactly what you're saying. It didn't have enough fuel in it to go down and come back up. It just didn't. In fact, Elon Musk just said about 3 weeks ago, in order to send humans to the moon, they have to make 18 trips to the space station first for the fuel. One of the things we uncovered, mind you, we have a millionaire financing us. So we bought documents from the widows of deceased Apollo astronauts. Some documents cost $10,000 each. And we found an original publication from von Braun, who said in order to go to the moon in one rocket, it would have to weigh 800,000 tons and be taller than the Empire State Building. And you would need 3 of those. So the Saturn V weighed 2,500 tons, okay, instead of 800,000 tons, which is a difference of 30,000%. So he said these numbers were mathematically irrefutable, and yet he says it's going to take an 800,000 ton rocket to go to the moon nonstop. And then a year later, he says, no, it's only going to take 1/30,000% as much. That's a bit off, isn't it? And why would you trust somebody who's that incompetent with math, or either he's lying? Either way, such a person couldn't go to the moon. And why is it today to do the very same thing? It takes 18 fuel trips first to the space station. There's a video of him on a Disney TV show from the late 50s saying you have to first ferry fuel up to a space station and then from there go to the moon. And of course, there was no space station when they claimed to have gone to the moon. This is one of the reasons they destroyed it. Another interesting point about the, fantasy lunar module is Elon Musk, in order for him to land a rocket vertically, he had 6 computers surrounding that rocket, and basically 6 rockets on the rocket to gimbal that thing to go down. It had at least 6 million times greater computing power than the lunar module, okay? 6 million times greater computing power. And the first time he tried to do it, this is with 5 decades better technology, it blew up to land a rocket vertically. The second time he tried it, 50 years later, with 50 years better technology, it blew up. The third time it blew up. The fourth time it blew up. It took him 5 tries to land a rocket vertically, and yet somehow they landed a rocket vertically 6 times in a row flawlessly with 1/6 millionth the computing power 50 years earlier, but they can't do it on the first, second, third, fourth time with 6 million times greater computing power 50 years later. That doesn't make any sense, you see? Destroying the original videotapes, that does not make sense. And when that happened, I talk about this in my book at Sibrel.com. Ron Howard, grandfather, warned him the moon landings are fake. He didn't listen to him, and he made these movies, promoting this lie. And he made, or executive producer of, a documentary about the moon landings that they wanted to show big on IMAX. So they asked for the original tapes. NASA said, we'll get back with you. And during that 1 week waiting period, they lost what I estimate to be 2 tons of original videotapes. They destroyed them. They admit they intentionally recorded over the greatest event in human history, right? When they have the Declaration of Independence, it's 250 years older, they don't have a problem keeping that, right?
Yeah.
So they destroyed all the original videotapes because he was about to broadcast them in a huge IMAX screen at 5 times the quality that had ever been seen, and that would likely give away the fake backdrop. So they destroyed them. So 95% of this documentary about the great moon landings are reenactments. And there are even parts, even in the IMAX screen, where he had to rent videos from Blockbuster. You can see the VHS scanning line in the bottom part of the picture, and they reduced it to like 5% of the IMAX screen because if you blew it up, it would look terrible. There was so little footage of actually men walking on the moon, that he had to rent it from Blockbuster because NASA destroyed the originals. Now, why would you do that if you really went? But if you're afraid for people to magnify the fake footage, that's exactly what you would do. You see?
Right.
So much.
Right.
proof
So
of
I'd like
fraud.
to, I'd like to interrupt here for a minute. There's somebody in the chat room who is not a fan of yours, and he was hoping that there would be some real questions, but this is obviously just a bunch of softballs designed to prop up Bart and help his DVD sales. So, Vector, if you haven't been here with us, you obviously don't know the platform that Augie and I stand for. We believe in listening to what people have to say. The views of all of the people that we have on may not be our views, but instead of ranting in the chat room and throwing snowballs, we choose to listen and discern the truth. So I would maybe, you've got an issue with this, but it would be lovely if you could maybe not dominate the chat room and distract everybody and even try to malign Augie and myself because we choose to be courteous and listen. Maybe there isn't 100% of truth, but if you listen, you may be able to piece something together that you have not heard before. So
I think that person is a blessing to the chat room because they're showing the fanatical point of view. Whenever anyone is fanatical about something and insults people to make their point, that's 100% proof that they're wrong. I mean, I make $10 at the most from a book sale, and the federal government made $200 billion, conning you. I mean, if a professor of a university says, if he saw Neil Armstrong confess on national TV that it was fake, that he'd still think it was real anyway, this is one of those fanatics. Basically, there's a famous quote from a film. It says, the likelihood of one individual being right increases in direct proportion to the intensity which others are trying to prove him wrong. I've gotten emails from people, numerous death threats. One said they wish that they could watch me and my family burn alive because I said the government lied about the moon landing. Now, anyone who's that wild mentally is on the wrong side of the argument.
And that's not the kind of energy that we choose to give life to here. But there are some questions that are not from that person. Somebody said, why? Why do you think it was a fake? What's the benefit?
Well, a lot of benefit. The first military source that told me it was fake says it was the money. I mean, it came out during the Iraq War that Dick Cheney's Halliburton or Blackwater, whatever it was charging $50 to the taxpayer for a 50-cent plastic ice cube tray, or what is that, 80,000% markup or something like that. So it's all about the money. They did not go to the moon, therefore they could keep probably 75% of the $200 billion and spend it on things Congress didn't approve. People don't realize how easy it was to fake. There's no independent press coverage. I mean, World War II was done in front of millions and millions of eyewitnesses, but there's no independent press coverage. When Ron Howard, imagine how much influence he had. When he said, I want the original tapes, we're going to transfer them to HD to put on this huge 100 by 120 foot screen, they destroy the original videotapes. Why would they destroy the original videotapes intentionally of the world's greatest accomplishment unless they were trying to cover something up? Why would they destroy all the technology? They admit they did it intentionally, even though they didn't destroy the technology of the atomic bomb. And so there was money. And then you had a pep rally going on during the Vietnam War protests, right? One thing you have to understand is Robert McNamara was defense secretary during the Vietnam War. On his deathbed, he confessed that the Pearl Harbor event, mind you, prior to Pearl Harbor, 90% of Americans were against entering the European War, as it was called. And so after Pearl Harbor, in one day, 90% were for it to get even. And they said, hey, we need something like that about the Vietnam War. They don't want us sending our troops over there to get involved with China's war with southern Vietnam. So they said, what can we do? So Robert McNamara on his deathbed said the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which is the Pearl Harbor of the Vietnam War, which totally changed America's support for the war, which was allegedly a North Vietnamese ship attacking an American ship and killing Americans. He said they completely made that up, him and the CIA. It never happened. Now, that led to the death of 3 million people, including 58,220 Americans. So I think if they're willing to kill 58,220 of their own people without cause, they're willing to fake an image on a television when there is no independent press coverage and when you have to, take us at our word. So It's actually much easier to fake. Some people like that, rabid person. When someone's rabid at the mouth like that, that means they're crazy, which means they're wrong. And so some people say, well, it would be so much easier to just go to the moon than fake it. They make arguments that are the exact opposite of the truth, just like that person in the chat room. They're so out of it mentally that their arguments are the exact opposite of the truth. Look at the film, The Martian. Did they fly to Mars and shoot on location? No, they shot it in a TV studio because it's easier to fake it than to do it. And yet some people say the exact opposite. No, it'd be hard to fake it and easier to go. They have no idea what they're talking about. And what they're saying is the exact opposite of the truth. When someone has such an emotional bond that they insult people to make their point or they threaten them with death, that's proof that they're wrong. You just have to have an open mind. And why would a college professor, someone with an alleged high IQ, why would he say that if he saw Neil Armstrong tearfully confess that the moon missions were fake, why would he say he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway? And I don't know what age that college professor is or was at the time, but he must have been like 10 years old. So he thinks as a 10-year-old watching it on television from his living room that he knows better than Neil Armstrong, who was there. This is that person and his ilk in the chat room. There's nothing in the world, no matter what truth or astronaut confession or shadows intersecting or them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes, or the fact that they can only send mannequins to orbit the moon, but they can play golf on the moon 50 years earlier. And a deathbed confession of someone who was there, who gave us a list of people who were there, which have been verified to be there. All these proofs that they didn't go, and they're mad for me popping their balloon, taking their candy away. And, maybe they just are so prideful they don't like admitting they were wrong. I admitted I was wrong. Maybe that's true.
Maybe that's true.
I admitted I was deceived.
Yeah, of course.
I admitted it. I was wrong. Sure. I was deceived. Sure. I rented a home a month or so ago, and I spent $7,000 buying, furniture, appliances, deposit on that house, and they deceived me. All the things they said they were going to fix, 5 of the 7 rooms, had puddles on the floor every time it rained. I had to move out. I lost $7,000 when I had $7,000 in the bank. I made a mistake. I was deceived.
Yeah.
I'm not. So let me. What can I do?
Let me just get in here because we have 2 minutes left, and I would like to end on a pleasant note. Go ahead, Augie. You have a question.
One quick comment, though, is that I would say for the fanatic in the chat room here, consider the fanatics. They may be right in some area of things, but you can never trust them, because they're not able for rational thinking. And another thing I want to say is that there is somebody on the moon, and it's not us. We have the pictures. There's pyramids up there. There's buildings up there. There's huge water tanks up there. There's crashed ships. We have the pictures. There's somebody up there. For a quick answer, who in the world do you think that is? Because it's not us.
Well, wait a minute. What you're forgetting is, and what all the alternative media forgot about. Okay, they're basically They know the media is lying about this little thing that's been going on for the last 3 years. Okay, they know that. They know the moon landings are fake. They know Oswald didn't kill JFK. And yet, when they say they're Chinese balloons flying across America, they repeat it word for word. And when the Pentagon says they outnumber us in nuclear missiles, they repeat it word for word. The CIA loves China. They could be staging the whole thing together. I cannot believe that people think they know that the media lies all the time, and then sometimes they repeat everything that they say. Wait a minute. You have pictures of alien craft on the moon. You have pictures of faces on Mars. Is this from the same people that gave you pictures of men on the moon when they were in New Mexico? I mean, you're like knowing they fake pictures over here, but believing pictures they say over here. There's an article I wrote at Sibrel.com. I spent about 200 hours writing this article, has multiple links in it to back it up. Are there really aliens from outer space? And I think that's a deception, because they really want us, for all we know, because I think, personally, I think the pyramid pictures and the face pictures are very convincing. But how do we know that they're real? How do we know they didn't do that as a psyop to convince us to believe in aliens for some future deception, right? All the intellectuals in the UFO community can easily look at the Apollo pictures and discern very quickly that they were taken in a television studio. So what is NASA going to do? They want these intellectuals to believe that they went to the moon. So we have to have some reason. Okay, we'll create some other pictures with alien artifacts and crashed spacecraft so that they think there were secret crews communing with the aliens. They don't care why you believe the moon missions are real, only that you do. If it's to commune with aliens or whatever, they don't care why you believe that the little event that's been going on for the last 3 years is real, as long as you do. If you think it came from a BAT, good for you. If you think it came from an LAB, good for you, which I think both are lies. Okay. One is for the alternative media and one is for the general public. So don't trust, the same people who, provided fake moon landing pictures and say that the fake, that the alien pictures that they also provided are real. I mean, come on.
Right.
You said what you said, Augie. Let me remind you at the beginning of this telecast, you said everything. Not half, not 90%, everything the public believes, and you're part of the public, is a lie, which would include the alien pictures, which are from the same people who faked the moon pictures.
Mm-hmm. Preaching.
You got me riled up on that one.
That's okay.
Or was it the coffee that I swore I wouldn't drink more of, and now I'm drinking more because I don't feel good?
Yeah. Well, gosh, this hour went by. And for those that thought we were a little quiet here, I have learned over the years that when I'm sitting listening to something that is really interesting, that I know the public wants to know about, I keep my mouth shut, because I can just distract more than anybody I know. But I know that if we look at the evidence you have presented, it's going to mess with their head.
Thank you for being
that's
here.
what we want.
Yeah, you just have to be open-minded and go to Sibrel, S as in Sam, I-B as in boy, R-E-L, Sibrel.com. You can see all these films for free. And if you want to get the audiobook that I read, or the Kindle or the print, I go into great detail about all this new information about how it was filmed at Cannon Air Force Base based on an eyewitness on a deathbed confession. We have the code name, the CIA code name, and we published the list in the book of the 15 people who were there at the time, half of whom are still alive. So,
that's great.
And by the way, I go into this in the book. After he gave me this information, the guy's son, his house was broken into, everything about his father was confiscated, and they threatened him with death if they ever spoke to me again. This was less than 2 years ago. So why would they do that if they really went to the moon?
Sure. So we usually have a question that Augie asks everybody at the end. Augie, ask your favorite question.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Here we go, Bart. If you could, let's say, if you could talk to the whole world and the world was listening, what would you tell them?
That's an excellent question. I love questions like that. Well, what I would say is the most important thing about the moon landing fraud isn't the moon landing fraud. And the most important thing about JFK and who really killed them, which is the CIA, according to the dead man's nephew, who has more access to information than we do, isn't who shot JFK. And the 9/11, it isn't about who did that. What all these things represent is that there are demonic forces running the world. And if you believe in the ancient texts, when the alleged Messiah of the earth was being tempted, the tempter said, all the kingdoms of the world belong to the evil one, and he can give them to anyone he wants. So the people who run the world are evil, and we're all going to die. And my favorite ancient text says, what good is it to gain the whole world and forfeit your soul? And you can go to Sibrel.com and scroll down, and somewhere in there is a link that talks about more spiritual issues. That's what the alien article that's on there about halfway down at Sibrel.com is about. Yes, they faked the moon landing. Yes, the CIA killed Kennedy. Yes, Cheney or somebody like that did 9/11. But what does all that really mean? It means that we're in a battle between good and evil. And that's why there's so much censorship, because if they can control what you think, they can control what you do. And they want us all walking off a cliff, sleepwalking. If the truth comes out about the moon landing fraud and why they're threatening my sources with death less than 2 years ago who are exposing it, is because imagine if it became known. I mean, an astronaut confession, government admission, it would be like the whole world got a glass of cold water thrown in their face. They wake up, they're a foot away from a cliff, and they realize they were sleepwalking. That's what it would be like. It would bring about great change and reform. The main thing is to save yourself, because you're going to die anyway. That's what I realized when I first turned down the project for fear of it being dangerous, and it proved to be. I have a recording that we accidentally got of an astronaut and his son discussing whether to call the CIA to have me killed. You know, you can hear it crystal clear. Do you want to call the CIA and have Bart whacked? Okay. Why would they have to do that if they really went? Okay. Mm-hmm. So we're all going to die anyway. And now is the time to take a stand for what is right. And personally, I think the evil people who run the world are doing such a good job, they can't be stopped. Now, I have an internet friend who thinks otherwise, and I actually hope he's right. I just think they've done such a good job with the scenario for the last 3 years and faking them, and they're just getting better. And so the issue really isn't who controls the world. The issue is what happens after you die. And are you going to be on the side with the wicked people or on the side with the people who do their best to repent of their wickedness? And so getting right with God before you die, which is confessing your sin and repenting of it to the best of your ability, is all that you have to do to take hold of the Messiah's offer to enter eternal life. And so the next life is what's really at stake. The moon landing fraud is just proof that the whole world is being deceived. How ironic, isn't it, that the greatest event of mankind is a complete lie perpetrated by the country that claims to be the hero in the world, when in fact they're the scoundrel of the world. I wish it were another way, but that's the way that it is. We have to face facts. You can see all this at Sibrel.com, and I'm doing my best to repent on a daily basis, to be a better person tomorrow than I was today. And your comment, Augie, I have to work on that, whether it's coffee or just my nature to ramble on. The ancient texts say, be slow to speak and quick to listen, and consider other people better than yourself. So you're more spiritual than me, because I did most of the talking.
Well, I got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I use them accordingly.
and we thank you for being here. Absolutely. And we'd like you to come back in the not too distant future.
Sure. Just give me an invite.
All right. So much more to talk about. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so
Nori,
much.
Augie, and Mac there, producer. Thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for spreading the word that we're in a battle, good versus evil, truth versus lies, and this is just one facet of that. And go to Sibrel.com to learn more.
It's true. Much love, everybody. We'll see you next week. Wait. Guess what? It happens this Friday the 17th. My favorite number, the Quantum Health, Lifestyle, and Wealth Show, 1:11 p.m. Friday afternoon Eastern Time, 40 minutes, maybe an hour, right? I'm going to try and keep it short, talking about everything under the umbrella, and be there. We are actually having a master teacher who teaches awakening to your light body at this very important and pivotal time in life. So come join us Friday, and if not, it's going to be on the replay. Much love, everybody. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mac. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. See you later.